So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is a very special lecture for us, a very special program that coincides with the exhibition of Heman Chong, titled "This is a Dynamic List and May Never Be Able to Satisfy Particular Standards for Completeness." And it is an exhibition that showcases Heman's practice over a span of 2 decades. It's a very timely and important exhibition for us in presenting Heman's practice, not just because of his practice itself, but his long-standing relationship with SAM. Heman has presented artworks at SAM since the 1990s, with exhibitions like City, Community, Nokia Singapore Art, the early President's Young Talents exhibition, Venice Biennale Singapore Pavilion, twice at the Singapore Biennale, and then more recently in 2020, a few commissions with us even during the pandemic. And these works are seen in the exhibition next door, so please do come by as well. So I think today's talk is also, in a way, connects very nicely with the title of the exhibition. The title, "This is a Dynamic List and May Never Be Able to Satisfy Particular Standards for Completeness," is a disclaimer that is appropriated from Wikipedia. In its appropriation, it points to the system of language, in this case, legal language. And in highlighting language, it surfaces the notion of systems that's very much inherent in Heman's practice. So these systems are not just linguistic, they are symbolic, they are visual. And today we are going to delve deeper into this. When you think about language, it is something that's very close to all of us, very intrinsic. The human capacity for language is one that is part of the way in which our brains have developed. You know, as a child, between the early age of between 3 to perhaps about 10, that is where the linguistic systems become embedded in your mind. This is the most flexible time where you can pick up a language. And language as a system also then allows us to understand the world, to navigate the world, to gain knowledge about what's around us. So for me, this relationship between language, the brain, and ourselves is a very interesting one. And I'd like to share with you a quote from the American neuroeconomist and neuroscientist, Gregory Berns. He wrote a book titled "The Self-Delusion: The New Neuroscience of How We Invent and Reinvent Our Identities." He writes, quote, "Narratives change the brain, regardless of whether they are self-told or encountered in the form of a novel or a movie. It is worth repeating that if it's in your brain, it is part of you," unquote. So the narratives that we are going to be looking at today are narratives that are also captured in the form of publications and books. And as you entered the museum today, you would have encountered one of Heman's works immediately, the Library of Unread Books. It is a library that is very special in how Heman has thought about what public libraries mean for us. And in Singapore, we are extremely lucky to have a fantastic library system. When you think of public libraries, you think of spaces with books where public can enter. But Heman has taken this idea and changed it together with René Stoll. Now, the Library of Unread Books is a library that is created through the community, through its public. It's a public library in every sense of the word. And they have written this very precise description, and if I might share a bit of it with you. The Library of Unread Books is an artwork that is alive. It is constantly growing and shrinking and has no definite shape or size or form. It is important that the library doesn't resist destruction because it can be rebuilt any moment via small acts of generosity by a community of readers and non-readers. Books are meant to be touched and to be browsed and to be read. The conservator and the host institution of this artwork must accept that this is a condition of the artwork. And so we decided to collect the artwork. When we first collected the work, what we collected was instructions by Heman and René. So it was a PDF document, right? And it was only in the first presentation of this work in 2022 at the Singapore Biennale that it then began gathering books and continues to this day. I would like to just end with a point about the importance of the location of this library too. For Heman and Renee, it was very important that the library is a space of access, that it is truly a public space. And they made this special note in their instructions. The library, it must be presented in a space that doesn't require a ticket. This is a foundational philosophy of this public library, that no one should be paying to access information and knowledge. And with that, I'd like to pass on to my co-curator, Kat Ditzig. I didn't say who I was at the beginning, did I? I'm Junior. And I'll pass on to Kat, who's going to talk a bit more about the program that we have today and our invitation of Bill. Kat,
so first of all, thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us, June. June and I are so privileged to actually introduce our speaker today, Professor Bill Sherman, and are so grateful that you've taken this afternoon, especially how hot it is outside, with us to think about libraries, to think about libraries, archives, collections, the data and information that surrounds them, and the type of communing they kind of represent. So that being said, we are very privileged to have with us Professor Bill Sherman, who is the director of the Warburg Institute, one of the world's leading centers for the study of art and culture. Heman and Bill, if you don't mind me saying, actually met through mutual friends and share many mutual interests when it comes to libraries and archives and the digital membranes of collections. In particular, Bill's research has been driven by an interest in archives and collections, and more generally, how objects are inherited and speak across time and space. He is best known, and I know we have some fans in the audience, for his work on the history of books and readers, particularly his pioneering work on marginalia and the history of libraries. Much of Bill's current research actually explores the interface between word and image, the relationship between knowledge and power, and the connections between the modern and the early modern. This color today's presentation on memory, memes, and metadata, and looking at Heman's practice in relation to Aby Warburg. But also, this is a topic that's very relevant to Singapore. They resonate with knowledge production in our post-colonial city-state, and also within Heman's conceptual practice, that if you visited the exhibition next door, you know gestures at an evolution of the entangled physical and digital circulation of images in both cultural and knowledge production over the last 20 years. I think with today's presentation and also more generally with the public program that supports the exhibition, we are looking into closer perspectives and deeper perspectives into Heman's practice. And I think through these presentations, we hope we can begin to read into the entanglements of the blurring of lines between artistic and knowledge production as they overlap, particularly today within the traditional format of the book, the library, and evolving innovative forms of data transmission. In this regard, I'm going to hand over to Bill now. It is my privilege to invite you to the podium for your presentation on memes and metadata.
Oh, thank you guys. It's such a pleasure to be here. It is my first time in Singapore, so I'm so excited to be here and really privileged to be able to say some words about Heman's amazing practice. So thanks to everybody involved for getting me here. And keeping me awake, because I just arrived this morning. So I'm not going to start with Singapore, though. I'm going to start with London, with news from London. And I'm going to move forward. Last month, the world's museum goers were given a glimpse of the future. It can now be found in East London, behind this nondescript entrance to the building that housed the Broadcasting Centre for the 2012 Summer Olympics. Named the V&A East Storehouse and designed by Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro, best known, of course, for building the Broad Museum in Los Angeles, the ICA in Boston, and maybe above all, the Shed at the end of Manhattan's High Line, it serves as the new storage center for the Victoria and Albert Museum's so-called reserve collection. That is, the hundreds of thousands of objects that are not on display in the museum's main galleries across town in South Kensington. And it's worth saying that that includes the entire collection for the nation of musical instruments, about 98% of the Indian collection, et cetera, et cetera. It's by far the majority of the collection. Now, what makes it so special is the decision not only to display as much as possible in a dizzying array of open shelving, but also to make all of the objects accessible to everyone through a system that allows visitors to call up individual items. I think you're allowed up to 12 per visit for an up-close look, putting in effect a national collection back into the hands of the people and making the experience no more daunting than a trip to the local IKEA. Now, in a rare show of journalistic consensus, the facility was immediately declared to be a game changer. Edwin Heathcote's feature in the Financial Times described the storehouse as a radical new museum, and in City AM, London's Deputy Mayor for Culture, Justine Simons, went so far as to call it the Museum of the Future. But, as so often happens when the papers or the politicians are scrambling to announce the next big thing, what gets lost here is a sense of the past, the origin stories and historical influences that had helped one of the UK's oldest museums to reinvent itself through one of the world's most traditional problems, storage. If the V&A has created a new kind of institution, it's fair to say, it has done so by going back to the future. Indeed, that was the actual title of one of the early presentations I myself helped to create in 2016 when I was the museum's Director of Research and Collections, in order to secure the approval of both the Board of Trustees and the Mayor's Office for what was always going to be an eye-wateringly expensive project. Now, as it happens, the 3-year period during which V&A East was conceived saw 3 of the most successful shows in the museum's history: David Bowie, Disobedient Objects, and Alexander McQueen, each a masterclass in deeply researched and highly engaging museology about subjects once seen as difficult, if not impossible, to display. But the history lessons stretched all the way back to the 1850s, drawing on more than a century and a half of progressive practice. There were pioneering developments in public access, in the use of technologies of reproduction, such as photography, plaster casts, in the circulation of collections to remote locations, in the incorporation of makers in the galleries, and in the integration of research as a core function cutting across all aspects of the museum's activity. And all of these activities were clearly tied to the V&A's founding principles as it emerged from the Great Exhibition of 1851. Now, for the purposes of the talk today, I want to draw attention to the 2 things in red. First, to the theory of learning espoused by Prince Albert, who is, of course, the A in the V&A, as well as its main intellectual architect. And as you can see, the first of his 4 modes, complementary modes of inquiry, was personal study from books. And Henry Cole, whom Prince Albert appointed as both chief curator of the Great Exhibition and founding director of the V&A, went so far as to describe the entire museum as a book that is always open, never shut. It's therefore surprising that the one category of object you do not see in the V&A's new storehouse, or even, for that matter, in the museum's old galleries across town, is books. And this is not, I hasten to add, due to any shortage of bibliographical material in the V&A's holdings. Indeed, the museum is home to the UK's National Art Library, which holds not only the country's official reference collection for reading about the fine, decorative, or performing arts, but also, more importantly, the national collection for the art of the book itself. Now, under the auspices of the department known as Word and Image, which happens to be the museum's oldest and largest curatorial unit, the library boasts excellent specimens of Italian Renaissance painting and Islamic bookbinding, no fewer than 3 notebooks by Leonardo da Vinci, and all but 2 of Charles Dickens's original manuscripts, the working material for Owen Jones's Encyclopedic Grammar of Ornament, and most of the output of William Morris's Kelmscott Press, photographic books from Fox Talbot to the present, and a comprehensive survey of book works by modern artists. So it may come as a shock to learn that during the last 55 years, there have been only 3 major exhibitions devoted to books. And in fact, both the first 2 in the 1970s, one on Charles Dickens, one on artist books, and then the last one organized by the person who introduced me to Heman, Elena Foster and Ivory Press in 2008. So when I asked my colleagues, or former colleagues on the exhibition steering group, why there weren't more shows on books, I was simply told that it was not possible to show books in an interesting way, and that the volumes held in the National Art Library were there as a resource for private research rather than a source of public exhibitions. Well, that's a long setup for this line. It is no exaggeration to say that Heman Chong is a one-man counter-argument. Few living artists, if any, have done more to explore the artistic potential of books and libraries. Few, if any, have done more to draw attention to the appearance of books in other people's work. And few, if any, have done more to put scenes of reading and writing into the heart of their creative practice. Even a quick survey of Heman's recent projects, many of them now on display in this very building, will give you a deep appreciation for the many ways in which books, libraries, and information systems can be mobilized in artistic institutions. Perhaps my favorite is 𝘥𝘠𝘮𝘪𝘴, first featured in last year's Lahore Biennale. Like many of Heman's projects, it extends a simple aesthetic idea into far-reaching social action. During a 3-day wander in New York's Metropolitan Museum, Heman used his high-res camera to capture the hundreds of books he spotted in paintings from across the centuries, sometimes as the main subject, sometimes as small details in corners and backgrounds. The images were made into piles of postcards, and on the left, you see my own spontaneous curation using only a partial selection from the entire set in an unused bulletin board next to my office. But most of the copies were hidden by Heman in books at Lahore's Sunday book market, like the ones you see on the right, with the hope that, as he put it, they would find their way into homes to be placed on fridges with magnets or used as bookmarks for other books. Another deceptively modest project, which we've just heard a bit about, is the Library of Unread Books that Heman has created in close association with librarian Renee Stahl for a number of venues, starting here in Singapore at NTU's CCA in 2016. These crowdsourced reference collections are built up through donations of books, as the title suggests, that people own but have not read. Captured here in its outdoor incarnation as part of last summer's Serpentine Pavilion, the version on display in the current exhibition was acquired by the Singapore Art Museum during the Singapore Biennale in 2022. And of course, those of you who are locals may also have explored Heman's closely related exhibition, Meditations on Shadow Libraries, at STPI early last year. Now, these simple rooms for study use the most generous of gestures to convert the shame of not reading a book into the gift of enabling someone else to do so. And in a different kind of bibliographical economy, also provide a cost-effective model to cash-strapped artists and curators for creating communal spaces of learning from whatever rooms or furniture become available. Now, Heman's longstanding practice as a painter also takes unread books and uses them to generate something new. Since 2009, his series of cover versions produces carefully rendered portraits of books that he has not yet read but intends to. And these, in turn, have been assembled into grids of painted rectangles called labyrinths, or libraries, serving as complex invocations of what Chong calls the ordered multiplicity of library collections. While the public libraries of unread books are open, casual, and ephemeral, Heman's painted covers are disciplined, controlled, even obsessive, definitely a kind of reading in its own right. And if these projects convert non-use into reuse, another of Heman's long-running projects, the photographic series he calls Stacks, turns books he has actually read, along with drinking glasses, perfume bottles, and other vessels, into little domestic sculptures, creating public records of what 𝘱𝘩𝘪𝘴𝘵 called the practice of everyday life. 𝘱𝘪𝘃's classic book of that title may be best known for its famous chapter on walking in the city, another quotidian strategy that structures much of Heman's work, and from what I understand, even life. But for 𝘱𝘪𝘃, reading too is a kind of travel, which provides textual foragers with the resources they need. Far from being writers, he says, readers are travelers. They move across lands belonging to someone else, like nomads poaching their way across fields they did not write. Through these textual travels, we are directed toward a reading characterized by advances and retreats, by tactics and games. We should try to rediscover the movements of this reading within the body itself. From the nooks of all sorts of reading rooms emerge subconscious gestures, grumblings, tics, stretchings, rustlings, unexpected noises, in short, a wild orchestration of the body. But elsewhere, at its most elementary level, reading has become a visual poem. Chong's book installations follow that same itinerary. The reader's body is invoked only by the domestic objects formerly used in the kitchen, bathroom, or study, as the artist's sculptural poachings turn a record of reading into a kind of rewriting. By design or by chance, or perhaps by a combination of the two, the titles on the spines sometimes become topical haikus, calling to mind the even longer-running project of American artist Nina Khatchadurian, whose Sorted Books series started in 1993 and offers snapshots of the individual collections into which she has been invited, with the sequence of titles reading as witty little poems. Taken as a whole, she writes, the clusters are a cross-section of a library's holdings that reflect its focus, idiosyncrasies, and inconsistencies. They sometimes also function as a portrait of the particular book owner. The books on the left, for instance, from 2014's Kansas Cut-Up, and reading Only Yesterday I Left My Grandfather's House, flashback, I left my grandfather's house, I left my grandfather's house, flashbacks, flashbacks, come from the personal library of writer and lifelong drug addict William S. Burroughs. The selection on the right from 2001's Akron Stacks and reading Conversations with Artists When Two or More Are Gathered Together, Dreams and Schemes, presented books from the Ohio Art Museum's research library. By putting them into her exhibition, Nina wanted to force the institution to share a collection that was not normally available to visitors, most of whom did not even know that there was a library in the museum. Now, one last pair of examples from works on display in the current show use Heman's treatments of a more extreme kind to generate new messages from old texts, taking techniques of censorship and information security associated with the secret world of military intelligence. Chong has turned his favorite spy novels against themselves in a kind of artistic double agency. In Call for the Dead, he has painstakingly redacted all of the words in John le Carré's classic Cold War thriller, except the verbs, on one level, reducing the plot to stark and sometimes brutal actions, and on another, leaving us literally and figuratively in the dark. As the label in the gallery explains, only with a sense of something having happened and the awareness that the text holds secrets not meant for us. With the earlier Secrets and Lies, the artist subjected 326 novels from the espionage genre to the deepest level of secrecy by running them through a paper shredder. Here, Heman Chong might finally seem to be more in line with a recent trend identified by Mia Lermhays in her catalog essay on the Utrecht iteration of the Library of Unread Books, for contemporary artists to feature censored or destroyed texts in large-scale installations. Hayes mentions Marta Minuchin's 2017 restaging of her Parthenon of books, first created in Buenos Aires in 1983, in which members of the public contributed copies of banned books to build a temple of forbidden knowledge. Hayes also points to the long tradition of performative book destruction, including John Latham's infamous Scoob Tower ceremonies from the mid-1960s, where piles of encyclopedias were ritually burned as a rejection of received wisdom or official knowledge. Now, the forms of resistance found in Chong's work with books are both gentler and more generative. Even in the extreme case of Secrets and Lies, the work of the shredder, I think, makes the text of the novels not so much illegible as differently legible, opening up individual phrases like fragments of poetry to completely new readings. And indeed, if we had long enough, we could, in theory, stitch the strips back into limitless numbers of newly configured stories, making the heap of pulped paperbacks a symbol not of nothing, but rather of everything. Now, these examples from Heman's work will, I hope, be sufficient to suggest what my former colleagues at the V&A have so stubbornly failed to grasp. Books are much more than words on pages, and libraries are spaces for far more than private, passive, or silent reading. So I want to use what remains of my time to argue that what they have to offer artists, curators, and members of the public goes far beyond textual or graphic content and takes us to the heart of the very means by which we come to see and know whatever it is that we come to see and know, especially important at a moment when digital tools are being offered as replacements for traditional repositories or skills. As it happens, the key concepts involved all seem to start with M. I will touch in turn on memory, memes, and metadata, and I will do so in the mode of another major M word, indeed the one on which I have focused for most of my scholarly career, marginalia. So you can consider what follows as a set of annotations on Heman's exhibition, written in the spirit of another project by Chong and his collaborators, EndNotes from 2012 to 14, all offered from the marginal perspective of the research library I left the V&A to direct, the Warburg Institute. When the great book historian Alberto Mangel published his poetic meditation, The Library at Night, a few years back, he placed so much value on the Warburg Institute that he chose its legendary reading room for the introductory image on its title page. He also devoted a whole chapter to the motives of the man who created it, Aby Warburg, born in Hamburg in 1866. The eldest son of one of Germany's most powerful Jewish bankers, he decided when he was only 13 that he preferred books to banks and sold his birthright to the family business to his younger brother Max in exchange for any volume he ever asked for. The brothers honored their agreement throughout their life, though Max later described the deal as the worst he had ever made. And the resulting collection grew so large that Warburg had to buy the empty lot next to his family home to create a new building to house the library with an elliptical reading room designed by Aby himself and the best technology that 1920s money could buy for reproducing, manipulating, and transmitting images. The curved walls would be compared to the breath of a magician by one of the library's earliest and most regular readers, the philosopher Ernst Cassirer, who later explained the source of its power. Warburg's library isn't simply a collection of books, but a catalog of problems. Here, indeed, the history of art, the history of religion and myth, the history of linguistics and culture were not only placed side by side, but linked one to the other, and all of them linked in turn to a single ideal center. The Warburg Library, with its associated archive and photographic collection, have come to form a holistic associative engine for exploring the histories of the arts and sciences, linking the textual and the visual, the intellectual and the social, the scientific and the magical. The shelves are still organized according to our founder's original scheme, devoting, as you can see, one floor each to image, word, orientation, and action, and designed to deliver what Warburg called good neighborliness. As the Institute's first director, Fritz Zaxel, explained, Warburg spoke of the law of the good neighbor because the book which one knew was in most cases not the book which one needed. The unknown neighbor on the shelf is the one that contained the vital information. The overriding idea was that the books together, each containing its larger or smaller bit of information and being supplemented by its neighbor, should by their titles guide the student to perceive the essential forces of the human mind and its history. In consequence, it will never be as easy to find a book in the Warburg Library as in a collection which is arranged according to alphabet and numbers. But the books remain a body of living thought, as Warburg had planned. For Warburg, what this body of living thought kept alive was nothing less than our collective cultural memory. He dedicated his institutional mission to documenting the way the past shapes the present, and he made Mnemosyne, or Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory in Greek mythology, not only his building's presiding deity, under whose name everyone entering the building must walk, but also the title of the unfinished magnum opus to which he devoted his final years, the so-called Bilderatlas, or image atlas, tracking tangled lines of visual expression across time and space, from the ancient world to the present. Now, in the end, the Warburg's turbulent history would give Mnemosyne more than usual to record in her capacious and ancient memory bank. Sent into exile when Hitler came to power, the entire institute, all of its staff, all of its books, even its furniture, was hastily transferred to England in 1933 and became part of the University of London in 1944, occupying the final building in Charles Holden's great master plan for a global campus in Bloomsbury. The Warburg Institute provided a means of escape for endangered academics before and during the war, and its library has served ever since as a safe haven and creative crucible for curators and artists alike. Indeed, it can claim to be the only such institution saved from the Holocaust to survive intact today. So it falls to the Warburg Library and its goddess in residence, Mnemosyne, to remember those that were not so fortunate. Under the brass letters that you can just about make out with the Institute's name, in what is now our public gallery, you may be able to make out a large white square structure. This is the so-called Library of Exile, created by British artist 𝘥𝘠𝘵𝑗𝑚 as a memorial to displaced authors and destroyed collections, including the one that belonged to his very own family, the 𝘭𝑪𝑐𝑖, who were Jewish bankers like the Warburgs, as well as world-class collectors, not only of books but also of art, as chronicled in Edmund's fantastic memoir, The Hare with Amber Eyes. Unveiled at the Venice Biennale in 2019, the Library of Exile traveled to Dresden before finally stopping at the British Museum in 2020. And at that point, the artist decided to donate the external panels to the Warburg Institute. We've been delighted to make the project a permanent installation at the threshold appropriately between our new gallery and our old reading room, the gateway to our roughly 400,000 books and well over 500,000 photographs. It stands in recognition of the Institute's status as Britain's great exiled library and as part of its commitment to making visible and legible the movement of culture across temporal and geographical boundaries. Now, Duvall is by no means the only artist to turn to libraries and their bookshelves for the purposes of remembrance. The Catalan conceptual artist Ignacy Aby has been known to show empty white walls carrying only smudges and scuff marks left behind by the objects that used to press against them. In one of his most powerful installations, seen here on the left in the 2005 retrospective at MACBA in Barcelona, he exhibited pairs of bare bookcases with bowed shelves testifying to what might well be described as the memory from long presence and considerable weight of now absent books. A more poignant set of empty bookshelves and a much darker piece of memory work can be glimpsed on the right in a glass-covered recess in the center of Berlin's Bebelplatz, the site of some of the Nazis' most destructive book burnings. Edmund de Waal may, in fact, have had this installation by Micha Ullmann, known either as the Empty Library or simply Bibliothek, when he conceived his own work. Inscribed on the outer walls of the Library of Exile and covered in a porcelain slip that partially erases the text is a litany of lost libraries, culminating in Heinrich Heine's prophetic comment from 1821, where books are burned, in the end, people will soon be burned. You can see it in German and in English at the very end of this text. That same text was etched into the label for Ullmann's work in the Bebelplatz, where Heine's own works, indeed, were among those to be burned by the Nazis in 1933. But de Waal's shelves, unlike Ullmann's or Aby's, are emphatically not empty. They were filled with 2,000 books by writers from more than 100 countries who persevered in the face of forced displacement. In the catalog published during the work's display at the British Museum, the Anglo-Turkish novelist Elif Shafak drew on her own multilingual migration in testifying to the power of language to transcend barriers. Now, it was one of Warburg's greatest insights that images could also do the same. Not just words, but images, carrying ideas and emotions with great force and great flexibility. If Heman Chong is one of the modern masters of the digital meme, and need we look any further than the cat on the exhibition's poster, Warburg showed us that the viral image transmitted through chains of imitation was very much a feature of the analog and even of the ancient age. Warburg's lifelong interest in what he called pre-coined expressions and his related attempt to delineate what he named in a coinage of his own as pathos formaln or pathos formulae pointed to a limited and recurrent visual vocabulary drawn on by both makers and viewers. His writings on the Renaissance period, particularly the paintings of Ghirlandaio and Botticelli, showed how much the visual artists of that epoch owed to the gestures, myths, and mysteries of the classical world. And for Warburg, the meme was very much a matter of memory, still part of the domain of mnemosyne. Warburg wanted to show us how symbols follow conventions, sometimes stretching so far back in time that we must wonder by what mechanism they are remembered. Is it possible, Warburg and some of his contemporaries wondered, that we inherit these visual formulae through biological means? When Richard Dawkins coined the word meme in 1976 in the context of his biological work on genetics, he acknowledged his 19th century forebear, Richard Simon, one of Warburg's main sources, on what Simon dubbed the mneme, M-N-E-M-E, from mneme, Greek for memory, the word, of course, from which we get the English mnemonic. At any rate, whether their origins are social, psychological, or biological, these archetypal units could be surprisingly deep-seated and even haunting. After all, Warburg once described art history as ghost stories for adults. And in the world of social media, the meme's horizon is unlikely to extend more than days or even hours, but the mnemonic image maps that Warburg drew in his Bilderatlas panels traverse the centuries. The project as a whole runs from ancient Babylonian rituals of divination to the circumnavigation of the earth by airship that made headlines in his native Hamburg just a month before he died. And some of the individual examples may surprise us in how precise and how persistent an ancient meme can be. Just to give you one of the most vivid examples, this is panel 55 of about 70 panels, total of about 1,000 images. This is known as the Manet panel for obvious reasons, because this, oh no, you can't see it. Right where the 𝘥𝘪𝘴𝘵 𝘛𝘩𝘪𝘴𝘵 label is, it's covering that famous painting by Manet, The Luncheon on the Grass, created in 1863 and now housed in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. What you can see around that is this constellation of related works, both before and after, that Warburg is trying to draw attention to. And he's particularly, if you see the biggest rectangle there, that's Marc Antonio Raimondi's print of a lost drawing by Raphael of the Judgment at Paris. So the main action is on the left. But on the right, this strange cluster of 3 reclined figures is taken from the recently excavated ancient river gods. And that was rendered very beautifully in this drawing, which was then captured in this print. And as you can see, it more or less sets a template. This is Titian in the middle, and then of course Manet down there. But what's so interesting to think about with an example like this is the fact that it doesn't stop. And I don't know if there are any Bow Wow Wow fans in the audience, but, and I don't know if it was Malcolm McLaren, the producer, who had this idea, but that cover is best known, of course, for the nudity of an underaged female singer, Anna Baldwin, but is actually really fascinating as an extension of the meme, and I think a really clear sign of the incredible savviness of Malcolm McLaren. And so that actually leads to an even more challenging question, which is now, I mean, Warburg died in 1929. That project is so forward-looking, it's as if it was waiting for the technology that we now have. But what technology, and what would you do with it? And this is one of the things I want to flag, just maybe for us to have some conversation about after. Our digital tools at the moment are very, very well placed to bring material that Warburg didn't have in his collection. Digitally dispersed collections can now be brought together more easily than ever before. But that depends on, obviously, a couple of, well, it depends on all kinds of things. Depends on legal rights. It depends on interoperability within the systems. But it also depends on metadata, which is the point we're going to come to in a minute, because how does the system know to draw that in? And in this case, there's been very interesting work, very preliminary work, now almost 10 years old, by some of the great computer scientists in Lausanne at EPFL, where they're building systems that can find related material. And it's very potentially powerful. And I think it could explode the atlas. The question is, what would Warburg have done? I think his brain would have exploded if he had these tools. But I also think he would have rejected most of what is being presented as relevant, because it simply looks like it's morphology on a giant scale, rather than thinking about what Warburg is doing in placing one image next to another, which is usually not about looking similar. So I think that is one of the, I mean, having said that, this is an example of morphology, but these are not. And so I think it's a really tricky thing, is how do we build the tools that can do this for us? I don't think we've really got there. I don't think we've really begun. I would also say, I mean, very, very little in the world of AI so far has anything like the metadata complexity of the analog materials that Warburg was working with. And until we get there, I don't think we're going to do any better or get any farther. So that's just something I wanted to flag. Another great example, because it just featured in the exhibition we just closed, which was our inaugural international exhibition. Another example that fascinated Warburg was the deck of image-bearing cards known as tarot, or tarocchi in Italian. In mid-15th century Milan, a conventional set of playing cards was suddenly enhanced with the addition of 22 triumph or trump cards, including, of course, the Fool, the Hanged Man, the Tower, the Lovers, the World, etc., etc. Well, those symbolic cards were not invested with magical powers or associated with divination until the late 18th century, about halfway through their 600-year history, when the whole business changes overnight and becomes a popular tool for fortune telling. But throughout this extremely long history of the form, the set of symbols itself remains constant in identity and endlessly adaptable in form, a perfect example for Warburg's methods. So Warburg's rough map you see on the left, and it's clearly just an initial draft because the numbering with 2 numbers at the top suggests that he was going to add a second panel, begins to trace the evolution of the deck's symbolism or iconography, leading up to the mass-produced Marseille tarot, the Tarot de Marseille that you see at the bottom, until the Rider-Waite tarot, by far the most widely circulated deck throughout the world, but also to tease out its possible associations with both art and astrology. Now, such a project depends on specialized training and a peculiar system of organization. The whole collection was built and arranged according to the new science, very much invented by Warburg, of iconology. And a key tool was the Institute's photographic collection, which is organized not as in other art historical archives by painter, date, country, style, and so on, but rather by the things that are represented, meaning that there is no folder for Caravaggio or Cubism, but whole file cabinets for fabulous animals, the attributes of Christian saints, or abstract concepts such as strength or victory. Now, these categories introduce us to the last of our M words, needed but not yet known to Warburg, metadata. Now, during my very first year as director of the Warburg Institute, our German-funded research group, the 𝘭𝘫𝘮𝘊𝘆 research group, and I always resented the fact that they chose such a difficult to pronounce name. Just thought, why can't you just have something easy to pronounce? But that's partly my own fault because I went to the Warburg Institute with no German, and that was a challenge, and it remains a challenge. At any rate, the group joined forces with one of the local art schools, Central St. Martin's, to present a wide-ranging exhibition called Metadata, How We Relate to Images. Its introduction gives a good sense of the scope and power of this form, taking it far beyond the cataloging fields or the digital tagging with which it is now mostly associated. As data about other data, they say, metadata describes and classifies information. The term itself is fairly young, dating from the late 1960s, and it was coined, of course, within the disciplines of information or computer science. As a phenomenon, however, metadata existed long before the digital age. Wherever there is information, there is usually metadata. Now, the curators give the example of a plaster cast held in the study collection at Central St. Martin's Art School. It's described as a griffin-type creature, crouching lion, cast of a Syrian lion, similar to those in the British Museum. In fact, it is none of those things. It's a copy of the famous Nereid monument from archaic Greece. But for the purposes of the art students learning to draw, that description was accurate enough and possibly even more useful than identifying what it was. These frictions in the description, as the curators call them, also attract numerous contemporary artists to the theme of metadata. Enter, again, Heman, giving us, as we should by now expect, a brilliant case in point with the delightful labels given to the sequence of rooms in the show. By guiding us, but in some way also puzzling us, they make us conscious of the work that categories do and acutely aware of the limits of labels. As the exhibition's overall title explains, after all, this is a dynamic list and may never be able to satisfy particular standards for completeness. Now, I want to end where I began with another glimpse of the future. Like the V&A East storehouse, it started to take shape around 10 years ago, but goes back to the very origins of an institution, and in this case, it's my institution, the Warburg. Appropriately enough, our current exhibition is on the intersection of art and the book, and as part of the opening program of events, we featured in one evening presentations on a pair of projects which both name Aby Warburg as their primary inspiration. I'm thinking, do you think we have time to show? Yeah? Everybody doing okay? All right, good. There are two projects that in some ways are embarrassingly untechnological. They're pretty basic in terms of the technology they use, but conceptually I find them really provocative and really, really interesting. And sometimes simpler is better. And I just want to show these two very quick videos to show you these glimpses of these two projects that are underway, one with a library and one with an archive. The library is called Zitterwerk or Zitterwerk. It's in St. Gallen, Switzerland, and it is in a building that was an art fabrication factory. And it's an extraordinary example of a conversion of a pretty traditional library using cutting-edge technology. And I just want to show you this. Whoops.
It may not allow.
That doesn't
When
matter.
we think of a library, we think of rows and rows of books. To find what you're looking for, you rely on categories and topics organized in central catalog. The art library in Zitterberg, however, works a bit differently. Located in the industrial area in Zittertal, near St. Gallen in Switzerland, the art library and the material archive live side by side with the Zitterberg Art Foundry and the Kesselhaus Josef Zone and several other arts and crafts studios and workshops. The vast majority of the library books originated with a collector named Daniel Rohner. Over 45 years, he built an extensive overview of contemporary art through collecting mainly exhibition catalogs and monographs. Daniel was a lover of books with a keen interest in artists' stories, and this made him spend much of his time continuously rearranging and regrouping his collection in new ways. When his books joined those of founder Felix Lehner in the Zitterwerk, he continued this way of working, moving books around the shelves and creating little compilations for artists and researchers who were visiting the library. After his death in 2007, the team in Zitterwerk felt they couldn't just confine the books to a standard catalog. They needed to let Daniel's ideas about personal collections and somewhat chaotic attitude to organization live on somehow. Around the same time, the introduction of an extensive material archive made this motivation for a truly dynamic system even stronger. Redefining the space as a kind of a laboratory for the future of libraries, the team at Zitterwerk took the very first step towards freeing the objects from shelves and drawers with the help of RFID technology. All these books, as well as all the material in the material archive, are equipped with an RFID chip. And this gets scanned and positioned continuously by library robots that move along the shelves. This allows the visitors of the library to continuously redefine the catalog because nothing has a fixed place. So for example, a person comes in and for his research he picks out the books that he wants, and when he's done with them, he takes them all together and puts them back in a shelf. Then comes person two, and person two is maybe looking for one of these books. So she searches for it, she finds it next to books that person one somehow found related to it, but that she would possibly never have thought of. Now the question is, how do we make these very subjective relationships more available, more visible, and how do we keep these constellations that people make beyond the point where the researcher walks out the door and they're lost? Back in 2010, a first attempt to answer these questions was made with the creation of an interactive table, able to create digital lists of books and materials and link them back to the library database. Now, 5 years later, we've expanded this idea into a library workstation prototype called the Werkbank. The Werkbank is a regular working table, but with a bit of a twist. As you go about your research in the library, picking out books and laying them out on the table, your workspace is automatically digitized with the help of image recognition and some more RFID technology. This doesn't only go for the books in the library, but also all the objects in the material archive. With the built-in scanner, you can even add things that aren't part of the library at all. And then, you can take everything further in the digital space by moving and scaling, adding notes and information to the different objects, or change the background of your working space for more complex organizations. Through this hybrid workflow, you curate the relation between things in the library. You make them richer, both for yourself and for others. For example, if you focus on a book, you immediately get information about work.
I think you get the idea. I want it, I have to say. It's a really, really cool idea, and you can see how closely connected it is to the work of Warburg. I mean, one thing I like is the way in which it's the librarian's worst nightmare in some ways of continual reshelving and moving everything around. But actually that is the most clear and tangible record of sets of interest and the way in which we can shape each other as a research community. So on some level, I think it's really, really cool. Also, nothing ever gets lost because of those RFID tags. Now, this is an interesting example, though, of a very self-contained system. It's one collection of books and objects. You have to go there to do it. It's its own proprietary system, which is why I don't have it, because I can't afford it. So, you know, that's that. I want to show you one last thing quickly, which is a very, very different system that Mariana Linari and her partner have been creating under the name Archival Consciousness. That's the, if you want to Google Archival Consciousness, you'll get all of their projects. This is a very interesting example of a project that they did. I think it was their first one in the art collection and archive 𝘱𝘐𝘓. And I will also show you, hopefully, a very quick video. Here it is.
Entire digital collections are hidden behind the search box. As a consequence, valuable collections are invisible and hard to access.
This is one where they go to help other institutions to archive theirs.
With a growing focus in
a single
digitization,
public interface.
how can cultural libraries and archives become more accessible? How can archivists, librarians, and researchers leave traces on the database and transfer knowledge to future generations? Our project is about increasing visibility to the collections of libraries and archives through digital literacy, by bringing semantic technologies to non-technical people with domain-specific knowledge to produce community-sourced linked data.
In this case, really simple. This just uses your phone.
and enable archivists, researchers, staff, and readers to turn collections into data in an ongoing effort with a participatory approach. By breaking down linked data in a way that anyone can do it, through text annotation and voice recording. It taps into a larger semantic model and feeds a knowledge graph, a social network of books and archival material, with an ethical data approach without tracking users. It will enable browsing, discovery, sharing, and reuse of research.
That's probably enough again. I don't think those are the answers, either of them, but I do think they're both some of the right questions. I mean, neither of them, as I said, use cutting-edge technology. Neither takes us very far with machine learning or AI, which inevitably we would want now. But despite those differences and the limitations, it seems to me that both of those projects, just as examples, raise pressing questions about how to make the institutions that hold and share cultural resources more dynamic and more democratic. Those two projects, I think, offer some preliminary steps toward the following goals that will occupy all of us in our different capacities for the years to come. How to create alternative taxonomies and flexible user-driven structures, not something libraries are very good at. How to cut across artistic, archival, and academic practice and get them to work together. How to put the physical and the digital into close and rich relationships instead of subordinate relationships. How to foster open, distributed, and interconnected ownership of cultural assets, and through that, to do what Heman did in his very simple way with the labeling of the rooms, or of the ways in which he titles, or the ways in which he uses memes, which is to make us conscious of and responsible for the way we access knowledge itself. And those things, my friends, are the possibilities that open up when we follow in the footsteps of Heman Chong or Aby Warburg and put books, libraries, and archives at the heart of our work. Heman, congratulations, and thank you very much.